What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another East versus West, the only podcast to bring you social distancing at its finest from East to the West.
Ooh, I'm gonna have to take this off though. I can't breathe.
Oof, yeah, I can't either.
I can't breathe.
We're pretty far away to the point where we don't need masks to talk to each other. So
Yeah, he did give me the flu on the last podcast we did together, but
yeah. Anyway, today we are going to be talking about the HHN30 leaked speculation lineup map. However you want to come out and say it. It is what it is. Take it with a tiny grain of salt. Potential spoilers ahead for if this is correct. This is not our map. We do not condone to linking. We don't. We're just the news passers.
yeah, we're kind of just giving our thoughts on the potential. It's always fun as big fans of the event to kind of just speculate. Speculation videos is always something that does really well for us, and talking about the potential of what could come or what we want to come is always fun.
Exactly. So this is HHN30. If you guys seen earlier this week, I did put out one for Hollywood. So if you guys want to see the Hollywood one, go check that out with our good friend, the Hauntline, Jonathan, who has his own channel now, and he breaks it down into further depth. So go watch his video as well. Shameless plug. Also, Eddie put out a video as of this recording this morning, kind of giving his speculation for HHN30.
Yeah, and it's a varied speculation. It's not just about what's coming. It's the impact of the current state of things, as well as some personal speculation, which is a little bit outside of the box. So it's not your typical speculation, just going off of what the rumors are. It's a little bit different of a speculation video.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, he does his own kind of opinions rather than what this map says, which is cool. For starters, I want to shout out Horror Night Nightmares, HN Nightmares on Twitter for releasing this. The reason why we're covering his map is because he has been right in the past of a lot of properties that have come to HHN, and we don't know how that is. We don't know why that is, but I'm gonna see what he has guessing for HHN30 because I might be attending this year, and
this is also his like first version. Throughout the like speculation season and announcement season, he does update it. So if you look at the post, it is version 1.0.
Yeah, this is version 1.0. We covered version 1.0 on our podcast as well. So yeah, let's jump right into it. Starting with Billie Eilish.
Yeah.
I've already given my thoughts on this maze and how I feel about it, but I want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, from a West Coast perspective, I haven't been to your event, so I don't know how you could fit it into your park per se. But for ours, I don't see it as a house. I can't see it as a house. But we do have that Lagoon show last year. What was it called? It was like a Mayhem.
Mayhem and Madness and Mayhem, or I don't know.
Yeah, something like that. And it was an amazing Lagoon show with a bunch of projection on water screens and music playing. So given that it's the 30th anniversary, I could see her fitting in. This is how she could fit in the best, is same concept. You got those water screens, projections of the history of Halloween Horror Nights the past 30 years with the music of Billie Eilish. So and you could use her current music. She doesn't even need to come up with a new soundtrack just for Halloween Horror Nights in this case. Because you could fit in some of her songs. It's really just kind of like background noise and kind of dramatic effect, not necessarily having to be tailored to horror if you do it that way.
Definitely.
So that's the only way that I could see her coming to the event. I mean, the general consensus is that most fans don't want this, but I will say this. There's been plenty of times people don't want something, but Universal Studios could pull things off. It doesn't necessarily need to be 100% horror for Universal Studios to bring it to Halloween Horror Nights and for it to work. They can kind of spin it into horror. So if this ended up being a house, which I don't think that possibility is too high, if it ended up being a house, I'm sure they can make something of it. And the teeny boppers and huge fans of Billie Eilish will end up loving it, and some of
Yeah.
the true fans of the event may end up enjoying it as well. Last year, for example, they brought your boy Rob Zombie, and his house wasn't terrible. It was much better than I thought it was going to be. Still, is at the end of my anticipated list, but it was much better than I expected it to be. So
To
that's
be
something.
fair, though, that property itself goes back a long way prior to it being a movie. That actually was an original maze set to be at Halloween Horror Nights.
Gosh
With
darn.
that happened to be an original maze Murdy actually planned up with Rob Zombie, and then Rob Zombie ended up making it into a movie, and then it came as a movie. So yeah,
Yeah.
and then of course with the scare zone that they had last year, I mean it's different with Rob Zombie and Billie Eilish. I think Rob Zombie very much bases his music around Halloween and you know a lot of the Halloween lore and just like a lot of the you know satanic lore and all that and you
Yeah.
know classic monsters and stuff as compared to Billie Eilish like I said I really haven't listened to her music so I can't really even base an argument around this but if you guys listen to the podcast that we put out this past week talking about the Hollywood version the only way this is the only way all three of us agreed how this can work as a maze would be if Billie Eilish came out and released an original soundtrack that actually tied into this maze and they can work around that other than that and we were also saying that like you know Orlando can do their own version of it and Hollywood can do their own version of it because that's usually how it works when properties like this come to the event. Like a perfect example is Universal Monsters. I mean Orlando did their own version with it. Of course, we had our version with Slash, and it was essentially like the same property, just two different style mazes.
Yeah.
And with Billie Eilish, you can't necessarily just put her music, her current music, into a maze and do that. You have to. I would think you would have to have an original score or soundtrack to that revolves around a maze telling the story. You can't just throw in her music and then tell a story. I mean, I guess there's ways creatively to work around that, but I think the best route would go to create original music that tells a story into the maze that you're bringing to this event.
Yeah, and Rob Zombie may have not been the best comparison, but a comparison nonetheless, because Rob Zombie is obviously much more horror than she is.
Yeah.
Uh, but if you look at the map, the speculation map, it actually does have it positioned as a house. So it's section E, which is the MIB area tents, the
Hmm.
sprung tents. So one good thing about that is the sprung tents don't tend to be the main event.
Yeah.
So if it's just a house to kind of fluff things up with some kind of like intellectual content, then cool, whatever. We'll see how it goes. There's also talks of an 11th house, 11th house coming to the event this year.
You can't spoke today.
I know, man. I can't even speak.
I will say this though. This is what I'm gonna say as far as advertising and merchandising goes. I think Billie Eilish, Gremlins, Adventures of Sabrina, the Universal Monsters, and Beetlejuice will be there pull-in properties for this year. Those will be the things you see on all the advertisements. Usually, HHN is famous for making a kind of a trailer based around properties that are going to be featured at the event, which they think is the most popular. And I think these and also Haunting of Hill House. These six properties are speculated to be at both events, and I think Billie Eilish has a huge fan base, and that will bring a lot of people who normally don't come to this event, much like how Stranger Things did. They'll bring a lot more revenue and money into this event because there's a lot of fans of Billie Eilish. And going back to Stranger Things, that's exactly what that property did. There was a lot of people who never went to the event, but the minute Stranger Things got added, the event got 10 times worse.
Yeah, and one thing to credit Losh. Losh and I had an argument about, or a debate, not an argument, a debate about Billie Eilish recently, and he's actually for it. But one thing that he did bring up, and like you said, she's definitely marketable. So marketing, they're going to use her from the marketing aspect, but
Yeah.
the house or positioning of the house that they're giving her is not a prime house. So another possibility could be that she gets a lower tier house with the fountain show anyway. So she gets both.
Yeah, definitely. So, Billie Eilish, yay or nay? Ultimately.
Personally, nay, because she's taking up a spot of something else that could come.
Definitely. I'm the same way. But we'll see. I mean, mazes that I've not wanted to come to the event have blown me away in the past. And yeah. This one is how do you pronounce this? Terra
The Terra, hold on. It is
Cretus?
Crentis.
I'm gonna go Terra Cretus. I don't know. Cretus. I don't know. I don't know.
So
it has an interesting logo next to it, which kind of looks reminiscent to a Mandalorian logo, for those Star Wars fans who know.
Yeah, the talk that I hear about this is the Terror Queen.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I didn't have the luxury of seeing the Terror Queen in person.
Yeah.
But I know that there is a lot of lore and history behind her. I think she was Halloween Horror Nights 15.
Okay.
And apparently the lore is that she returns every 15 years. So that, I think, is how they're going to be fitting her in with this house. So this will be her own personal house, and this would be 15 years from her last sighting, which would make sense with the lore that she's backed by. Aside from that, I don't really know too much more.
Okay, so she's basically every 15 years kind of person, which is perfect for Halloween Horror Nights 30, being its 30th anniversary, and another 15 years has gone by. Was she at the very first Halloween Horror Nights then, or no?
I don't believe so, but I could be wrong. Because the very first Halloween Horror Nights was Fright Nights.
Okay.
So she may have been. She could have been in the Dungeon of Terror.
Yeah. So for original mazes at Orlando, I'm gonna let Eddie kind of take the spotlight for these because he knows a little bit more lore and info about past things that could relate to what these properties are, or they're just kind of made up properties that he's just kind of guessing. But
Yeah. And just kind of doing a little bit research on the spot. So the Terror Queen, it seems like she was kind of on top of her 15-year lore. She was kind of like the fairy tale, like gone wrong, because it looks like the tagline for that year was "No one will live happily ever after."
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah. So, and I know there was a lot of storytelling in that year. Actually, I may have actually been at that year. The storyteller was there too. I think I may have actually been at that year. So, I think from a fan perspective, all fans love the times or the years of the icons, at least for Orlando.
Yeah.
And if there's an opportunity to see somebody back from those years, I would say 100% yes, and mostly for an original property.
Definitely. Which kind of ties into the next one, being of a storyteller, bedtime stories. So does this have anything to do with the storyteller?
I think so. I think this is the same lady, which is that old creepy lady from the same year as the Terror Queen.
The granny looking lady in her chair
Yeah,
and
the
everything.
granny looking lady with the chair. And I remember, damn, that was a long time ago, man. I'm old now, but I remember going through her house. So I think I actually was at HHN15. It would make sense. My first year was the 12th, so I went several years in between that, but not consistently. I've only been going consistently the last like 8 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's like an old creepy lady that tells like creepy stories, and if I remember correctly, her house was filled with like creepy old dolls.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So that
yeah,
one. Go ahead.
what would be cool in this maze, since it's called bedtime stories, it would be cool that a lot of the stories revolve around the icons over the years, to kind of give it not only just focusing on the storyteller's own maze, but on top of that, giving the other icons over the past years who've made HHN and Orlando the past 30 years some of the greatest years ever. You know what I mean? So like it'd be cool if you saw Easter eggs of like the Crypt Keeper and Jack the Clown, all these awesome, the director, all the caregiver. I think it's the caregiver, right? Is it the caregiver? Caretaker, yeah.
The caregiver.
Caregiver, yeah. But it'd be cool to
I'll take care of you.
It would be cool to see little Easter eggs and references to like each story she's telling is a story of each icon.
That'd be dope. And I know that there's a lot of talk about the icons and this anniversary year, so
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised.
All right, the next property we have, which is a shared property for both events, Universal Monsters: The Bride. Um, so with The Bride, and this is another kind of talk that we had on the podcast, which was The Bride has been in Hollywood has been in both adaptations of Universal Monsters. She was in Universal Monsters the first year it came, but she was getting chopped up and she was like a regular person still. And then the second year for Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, she was in the Dracula or the Frankenstein's castle scene, but chopped up and all burned up. So it seems to me that Universal, or at least Murdy, wants to give the bride, he wouldn't just put these Easter eggs in that maze for nothing. It looks like we are going to get a story of the bride. And my theory goes, since we've seen her in the first maze getting chopped up by Dr. Frankenstein himself, and then we see the aftermath of her burned alive and still alive and all chopped up and stuff. My theory goes, we'll probably get if we do get a bride maze, we'll get a maze of how she was built, to her coming alive, to her maybe terrorizing something, to her being captured again, to Dr. Frankenstein trying to work on her to kind of make her different. That's when we'll get her chopped up, and that's when we'll get the events of Universal Monsters and Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, which would be a really cool throwback to those two mazes in Hollywood. But that's just how I would look at that story if they were to do it over here in Hollywood.
Yeah, no, on this one, I'm gonna have to lean heavy on you because as far as the bride goes, I don't know too much about the bride and her backstory. But one thing I can say is last year's Universal Monsters House was freaking amazing. So I welcome this one with open arms, and
Mm-hmm.
I hope they bring it back heavy with put it into one of the what's it called, the sound stages, to make sure that the quality and their special effects are amazing.
However, yeah, I mean, both maps are speculating the Bride of Frankenstein, and um, I mean, who knows? Maybe we could just be getting the Bride, and then you guys get something else. Maybe they'll translate a version of Frankenstein meets the Wolfman for you guys, so you guys get to kind of experience that one, because it was a lot different last year. Because last year was your first year of getting Universal Monsters in general, so they kind of gave you guys a little bit of everything in that maze. Whereas for us, we had it the year prior to that. And then the last year we had Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, which was a solid and fantastic maze. I loved the way it was designed and everything, and the story it told was awesome. Same goes for Orlando though. That maze was just solid. The effects looked amazing, and the set design just looked awesome. So yeah, again, like you said, I am all for Universal Monsters coming back. I'm not tired of it yet, and yet every year they keep upping the ante and just making a better maze than before, especially over here in Hollywood with the music by Slash. I would think the ambiance of his original score adds an amazing touch to this maze, especially what he did with Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. It was kind of like a gypsy type music, which like was really good, and it fits so well with this maze. Um, so I'm all for it. If they're gonna do the Bride of Frankenstein, that's awesome. There are other Universal monsters that I feel we can tell a story with, but I would love to see the challenge arise with the Bride of Frankenstein.
Yeah, no, and like I said, last year was so good. I just welcome it with open arms.
Definitely. So next up on our list is Beetlejuice. Now, what are your thoughts on Beetlejuice? Because I love Beetlejuice for one. And last year, if you looked at any videos or if you guys actually went to the event, if you guys went on any of the 80s nights, which was Thursday nights at HHN, Beetlejuice was actually walking around. He was actually one of the hosts for 80s night. And not to mention, during the day, you can take pictures with him and stuff. So it's been kind of hinted at that Beetlejuice is going to be coming to the event for a couple years now. What are your thoughts on a Beetlejuice maze?
Well, Beetlejuice has a lot of history with the parks. He's been around for a really long time. From the opening of the parks, he had his own show.
Yeah.
And to this day, even when it's not close to haunt season, he's roaming the streets during the daytime. So I think this makes a lot of sense. I think the movie can be, if Ghostbusters could be translated, this movie could be translated.
Definitely.
This is definitely much more horror. It is kind of like comedic horror, but I could see this going really well. I'm a huge fan of Beetlejuice. I know a lot of people. My girlfriend's sister is actually a huge fan of Beetlejuice as well. So, funny enough, she's not a huge fan of horror, but telling her that this would be at the event, she actually would consider coming. So
Definitely.
you could see Beetlejuice. So, um, the movie itself is great, and there's a lot of crazy aspects like that kind of like long snake, the black and white long snake that he becomes.
Yeah.
I could see that being like the like the top of the house, like that's the main scare, and the rest of the movie offers a ton. And also seeing yourself maybe feel like you've been shrunk into that small town on the table,
Yeah.
and walking through that and maybe seeing other large figures around you that make you feel like you're small in a small little town.
Yeah.
That'd be cool as well.
I think what would be really cool too is like the room before you see like a or like in the beginning of the maze you see the model of the small town right there, and then like later on mid maze you actually end up in the town, which would be really cool. It kind of
Yeah,
transforms you into that whole thing. And I think a perfect facade for this, like I said on my podcast, would be the inferno that you see throughout the entire, in the movie where it
yep,
says like air conditioning in here and all that. Like that'd be a freaking awesome facade for this maze.
yeah, yeah. No, I like this one through and through. This is a great property with a ton of history with the event.
Definitely, yeah. Beetlejuice, I'm all for it, man. I mean, I think it was a big tease, especially last year when he was at the '80s nights, just walking around and just just being funny and being Beetlejuice and stuff. So that was really cool. All right, Dungeon of Terror. Tell us a little bit about this.
All right. So once again, another house that I didn't get the chance to. Well, actually, I think we figured out that I actually did to get to experience the other house, but this one I know for sure I did not experience. The Dungeon of Terror is an original house from when the event like first started with Fright Nights.
Yeah,
So I've only seen very few small walkthroughs, and I've actually it's a good person to reference is Losh. He did the history of Halloween Horror Nights, and he was doing it year by year.
yeah,
And he actually captured a few clips, or was able to find a few clips of the Dungeon and Terror. So as far as like what it was like, it looks like this was back in the day when we didn't live in that PC world, and terrifying was terrifying.
yeah,
It wasn't terrifying and dumbed down so that people didn't get offended.
yeah.
Um, so how they would bring that house, how it originally was, to today's day and age is interesting. But just a simple fact, I think one of the things that I appreciate a lot is when they bring back Halloween Horror Nights history to the event. So something that we've seen in the past, and now we get to see it again with today's technology.
Definitely. That sounds awesome, man. I mean, I think I would really like to see something like that. Um, and yeah, I mean, if it's part of the history of HHN, bringing it back for HHN30 would only make sense just to reinvent it with today's effects and designs and stuff, which would probably just enhance it and make it a lot scarier. So I'm all for it. Let's do it. The Adventures of Sabrina, a Netflix property, one of two Netflix properties that is being speculated for this year's HHN. My personal opinion, I have not seen the show yet, so I don't know what to really look forward to in this show, and I don't know what I'd be getting myself into walking through this maze. So I would have to definitely watch the show. I heard it's a very dark show, but it's very Riverdale-like kind of Sabrina. This is like the time where we're seeing this is like the day and age, I guess, where they're when they're trying to redo a lot of shows that you kind of grew up with as a kid, but make them a more Riverdale style kind of young adult like show. Kind of leading off the HHN boat for a little bit, but there's actually a YouTube channel right now that is reinventing Scooby Doo into a Riverdale like show, and it actually looks pretty interesting, which I thought was.
Interesting.
Yeah, it looks really good actually because it looks more like serious and more adult, but it keeps the nostalgia of like the old school, like their costumes and everything, which I thought was really cool. But going back to Sabrina, this is kind of I've heard a lot of good things about the show. That it's got quite the fan base on Netflix. I think they're on like chapter 3 right now or something like that, which is basically season 3. and it's a lot darker and stuff like that. So I want to know. First off, I gotta watch the show, but I want to know if there's creatures in the show, and if so, will they incorporate these in the mazes? What is really so scary about Sabrina that they can bring into the maze? That's my biggest question, and I gotta get that answered after I watch the show.
Yeah, and I'm with you 100%. Haven't watched the show. I've seen the marketing and advertisement for it, which definitely looks like a darker version than the Sabrina the Teenage Witch that I'm used to.
Yeah, the '90s one back in the day, man, with the puppeteer talking cat and everything.
Yeah, she's not a cute blonde.
Yeah.
This girl looks pretty menacing for a little girl, at least in the advertisement that I've seen. So, yeah, I would withhold my opinions up till I watch an episode. But I could definitely see, even with the original, like, lighthearted TV show, the cat and its witches, I could see that translated. And if they have now an updated, more menacing version, even better. So this was one that was speculated for last year as well. So Netflix, if Stranger Things isn't returning, I could see Netflix returning in this capacity. But what we'll speak of next is actually what I am looking forward to most.
I think so. I think out of all this list, this is kind of going to be on my top kind of priority as to if this does come to the event, this will be the maze that really will catch my attention the most, which is The Haunting of Hill House. Great show for one. It's more of a psychological horror than it is your standard normal horror, which I really enjoyed about it because every episode kept you wanting, it kept wanting to push your boundaries as to you wanting more and you trying to figure out this whole family and this whole like secret and eventually getting to that end, because they do show a lot of clips in the beginning of this show where actually they make a lot more sense at the end of the show. An example I brought up on the podcast, which is a perfect example, is remember in the very beginning of the show, you actually see the mom like running in the hallway and it's all dark, but it looked kind of scary of her just running at the husband. I don't know if you remember that or not.
Yeah, no, I remember that. I just recently rewatched it.
Yeah, it when I saw that scared the fuck out of me. But then when you get later on into the show, there's actually meaning to as why she did that. She didn't just do it to do it. There was like a meaning towards it. So this was definitely it had you everywhere in this show. I mean, you got to see everyone's kind of point of view at one point too, as to what they're going through as far as the deaths and everything. And that's not a spoiler, by the way. That's actually in the trailer. But it also, I mean, the ghosts in this series were just, terrifying. The top hat guy was terrifying. The bent neck lady was terrifying. Just the whole vibe. I think the scariest part in that whole show though was when the two sisters are driving and all of a sudden the ghost of the other sister just pops up right in the middle and just does that scream. Like, if they can find a way to incorporate that into the maze, like, I would love that.
Yeah. So for me, if this gets announced and this current lineup ends up being the lineup, then this will be my number one anticipated house for the year. No doubt.
No, agreed.
The Haunting of Hill House has to be the scariest TV show I've ever watched.
Yeah.
And even puts some movies to shame.
Yeah.
With what it was able to pull off. The scenes and just the subtle tones of this TV show are so eerie.
Yeah.
A lot of the scenes of when they're in like is it a mortuary or
yeah.
Right.
Mortuary.
They were
terrifying.
They were terrifying. Yeah. And then,
especially when they just shut off the lights and it's all dark in there, they're all freaking out. Like,
yeah. Then the connection with everything, figuring out that and spoiler alert if you haven't watched the show, but figuring out that the apparition that they were seeing was actually a premonition of what would occur.
Yeah.
To them,
Yeah, that was trippy to find that out.
Right. The Betneck lady was actually one of the characters that was alive, the sister. Yeah. Right. So yeah, it was terrifying.
Though psychological horror, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and when they announced the first sister passing away because she went back to the house, and the brother walks into the house and he sees her there.
Yeah.
The father calls on the phone and he's like, yeah, she's right here. But like before he could say that, the father's like, she went to the house, and he's like, what? He's like,
Yeah.
yeah, she went to the house, and she's like, what are you talking about? Like, Elle's right here. He turns around and she's like right in his face, and she like all gray and like her mouth
Yeah.
opens up. Yeah, it was terrifying. Um, and that mixed in with the fact that it's like an old Victorian home with some of
Yeah.
the most terrifying characters that we've seen on TV. I said this in my speculation video that I released today. It's too easy to make amazing.
Yeah. It's like,
So,
so I mean, obviously you guys know the story. There's been so many adaptations of the Hill House hauntings over the years, which was actually a real thing that happened in real life to families. The Hill House was a real place and everything. So there's been so many adaptations of this, but I think by far this is the scariest, the most detailed, and the most best adaptation of a Hill House haunting ever. You know what I mean? Um, and I really like what they did with this, especially going into the announcement of season 2, which is going to be Bly House or Bly Manor. I'm sorry. And what I like that they're doing is this season, the way it ended, it finished one story. So it's going to be like an American Horror Story type of thing where they're just going to keep going to different haunted locations based on real events and just use the same cast and just start a new story, which I think is awesome. And I think they were saying with Bly Manor too. This if you thought this season was scary, this season is going to be even scarier because of the history that this manor has over the years, which I think is very cool. Little side note too, if you did like Haunting of Hill House, the same guy who directed that show and wrote that show and produced it, actually directed and wrote a movie called Hush that's on Netflix.
oh
It's
yeah,
really good. That's talk about another psychological horror. That one's
yeah,
based off a deaf woman, and there's an intruder trying to get into her house, and she cannot like hear anything. And I think that's an amazing idea for a movie.
yeah. And he's just playing around with her at first, kind of like a cat
Yeah,
playing with his food.
trying to see his limits as to what he can do and stuff, and then eventually she catches on. But the whole movie is like I think the whole movie takes place in like her point of view. Like you hear her talking in her thoughts,
Yeah,
and like there's some points where you just don't hear nothing to give that deaf vibe. You know what I mean? Which I thought
yeah.
was really cool.
There's a lot of nothing. You hear a lot of nothing, and it's a lot of her like typing on her iPad, talking to her sister,
Yeah.
and things like that. Yeah, that was an interesting movie and a concept that was pulled off really well.
Yeah. And again, the guy who created Haunted at Hill House did that one too because that lady that he used in that and in Hill House is his wife in real life. So, um, yeah, I mean, just this guy is amazing, and I am 100% on board for this maze. I think they can, if they collab together and really bring this to life and give us this experience, I will definitely be excited. They just have to do it right. Just don't give us a Stranger Things 2 kind of thing.
Yeah.
um, so the next one, another original for HHN Orlando, which is Legendary Truth Cary, Ohio. What do you know about this?
So this one's kind of like a double-edged sword. So
Mom Spaghetti. All right, we're back on.
okay, all right. So we apologize for that minor
Technical difficulty.
technical difficulty. There we go. You're finishing all my sentences.
I am. I am.
Social distance couple, one on one side of the coast, and the other
That's
one on the other
best.
side.
So, the Legendary Truth of Cary, Ohio. Tell us a little bit about this lore of a Halloween Horror Nights Orlando.
Okay, so I don't know what we captured before we cut off, so I'm just going to start all over again. So,
Yeah.
Cary, Ohio, once again, is kind of a internal Halloween Horror Nights Universal Studios lore that some of the like hardcore fans as well as the people that work there are aware of, but your average person may overlook it completely. You'll find it in different scare zones as well as different places in actual houses, but you have to look for it. It's not just sitting there. So, for example, I was saying that Trick or Treat and the scare zone that was in the location of Trick or Treat before and after, actually, on the right-hand side, there's a little sign that they had placed. It's a little tucked away. It's not like hidden, but you wouldn't necessarily like focus on it because it looks like it's a prop, but it says "Welcome to Cary, Ohio," and it's a fictitious location, but something that is kind of like a running lore with Halloween Horror Nights. Mix that in with the Legendary Truth, which the Legendary Truth goes back in the history of Halloween Horror Nights as some of the best times of Halloween Horror Nights, some of the best interactive sites for Halloween Horror Nights. So the Legendary Truth was basically the heart of it was an interactive website where basically they released like little pieces of evidence and investigations that were going on, and then you were recruited to become part of the Legendary Truth. I actually had those badges that I gave away, and I need to send you one.
Nice.
The Legendary Truth badges. And basically you were recruited to be an investigator and help figure out what had happened to this professor or this doctor who disappeared or was murdered. And like the more you figured out, there would be like puzzles and things that you would have to figure out as a collective. So like as a fan base, everybody that was together working on it would figure out things day by day, and that would give everybody more evidence.
So would this game be a lead up to the event then?
Correct. It would be a lead up to the event. And I believe, I don't remember exactly, but I believe during the event there was also little games that you could play, kind of like last year's Graveyard Games.
I am all for that. That if I get to put on my Batman cowl and get down to work, world's greatest detective over here, I'm all for it, dude.
I don't know
that okay. If that comes, that maze alone will make me come out to Orlando.
Yeah, this maze would be the end all to be all for the hardcore fanatic. Even if you weren't there for these years, these are, no pun intended, these are legendary years. Like people are aware of the Legendary Truth. But these are, I don't know if Hollywood had this, but during these years, there was a lot of interaction with the websites that would lead up to the first announcement. Usually back then, the first announcement would happen in June, as opposed to now it happens like in February and March. Well, not given the current situation, but it had become that it would become the announcements would come so soon. But back then, the announcements would start coming in like June and July, and they would only come if you were interactive with the website and we're actually like solving these puzzles. And I remember for 1 year, I forget who it was. I think her name was like Lucky Seven or something like that. Don't quote me on that, but it was something of that nature. And basically, you could go on the website every single day and try your luck at a puzzle. And you would only be able to try like once a day, and it would give you information. If you got it correct, everybody got to the next step together.
Oh, nice.
So basically, everybody's working as a collective together to open up the website more. And the more you figured out, the more things that would pop up on the website, like scare zones would pop up, and then houses would pop up, and
shows, all that stuff.
Stories, who was the icon of that year, things of that nature.
So that you said it was once a day. Does that mean only one person can go on per day, or everyone can go on once a day?
So everybody could go on once a day and try their luck at it.
Okay.
And as a collective, if one person got it right, everyone
got it right. Yeah. Okay, that's cool. No, I like that. And to mix two. One being a giant Easter egg that's probably been with the event for the 30-year history, and the Legendary Truth kind of lore, to bring the two together and finally give the Legendary Truth of Cary, Ohio. You're finally going to go into the world of this fictitious Cary, Ohio, where you've been hearing about it, you've been seeing about it for the event all these years, and now you're finally going to get a story behind what the hell is this place. You know what I mean? So I think that's a fantastic idea, and from what Legendary Truth kind of sounds similar to me is the Paranormal Inc. maze that we have over here at Not Scary Farm, which puts you into the show of Paranormal Inc. And you go into this abandoned hospital, and you're trying to solve this mystery of what went down here. So I think this is a great idea. I love it, especially when stuff is very interactive, because I am a sucker for interactivity. It's awesome, especially with Graveyard Games, how they did that last year, where you can go on like their social medias and see what the characters were talking about and stuff before you went into the maze. I thought that was a really cool idea. So if they're going to incorporate and bring back the Legendary Truth, which from a lot of the original properties we've been seeing at Orlando this year, they really want to bring that nostalgia of for the diehard fans who've been going all 30 years or who've
Yeah.
been going for majority of the years, and who've witnessed a lot of these, which I think is a great idea.
Yeah, and if the event ends up getting minimized because of the current events and social distancing, then they could technically remove all the IPs, save themselves the money of having to license those IPs, and just use their own originals, which at this point have been around for so long, and the like actual true fans are so familiar with it. It almost is an IP to us.
Oh, no, and definitely. And not to mention, they have so many originals to work with. They can create an entire event out of that alone,
Hmm.
which would be perfect for the 30 year. And I think it would make that year way better than including, IPs in it because
Yeah.
that would drive not only fans that are in the area, but people like you and me who are out of states. That would drive people out of states just to come down to this event.
Yeah, and the Legendary Truth was there for the 20th year anniversary, which was Fear himself.
Okay.
And I think originally it was there for a reflection of Fear, which was the Bloody
Bloody
Mary.
Mary, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. I remember seeing a lot of the promos for that and the
yeah.
opening scare movies for that,
And
which was really cool.
I think also one year, the Legendary Truth had its own separately paid haunted house, which was a 3D haunted house where you actually like put on a 3D mask and walk through the house, which I didn't get to experience, but would have been pretty cool.
Sounds good, man. All right, and finishing it up with the last house over here for HHN 30 Orlando, which is a shared property with both Hollywood and Orlando, is Gremlins. Now, I have never seen Gremlins, but just seeing the puppets, like I don't think I'd be a big fan of them, but I've had people tell me that this is actually a pretty, funny comedy horror type movie. And of course, I mean, I probably should watch it because one of my favorite directors of all time, Steven Spielberg, directed this. So it's got to be somewhat good. I mean, I think it's grown its fan base within the last couple years than it has when it first came out, and it
Yeah,
just has that cult following. So,
yeah.
what are your thoughts on Gremlins coming to the event?
I think it's crazy that you haven't watched it.
Yeah.
Given that you're a horror fan, given the name of your channel, I think this is a must. So we're gonna change the name of your channel temporarily up to you finish watching it, okay? No, I'm kidding. But Gremlins is exactly that. It's a cult classic. I think it's one of those properties that when the movie originally came out, it didn't do well in theaters, but with time, kind of like what's it called? The Shining. Most people won't know this, but The Shining didn't actually do well in theaters. It
Yeah.
only throughout the years actually built a cult following. It originally actually was hated by the writer. The what's his name?
Stephen King.
Yeah, Stephen King actually hates that movie to
Yeah.
this day.
Actually, no, he's come to terms with it now because if you watched a lot of the promo for Doctor Sleep, he was at a lot of the press conferencing and he's come to
Yes,
terms
but
with it.
he said Doctor Sleep was actually basically making up for the original Shining movie.
Because with Doctor Sleep, he said that it did an amazing job, telling the story of his book, but it also did an amazing job giving you a sort of sequel for The Shining, which
Yeah,
was
but like that is Gremlins. It didn't do amazing originally, but it built a huge cult following, and I love the movie.
yeah.
Gremlins is a funny concept that it's a cute fuzzy toy, and the funny thing about it is it's so avoidable, right? The circumstances that cause the issue is don't feed the damn thing water or let it come in contact with water. It's not that hard, but somehow, some way, they get in contact with water and they go from cute to these hideous little monsters that wreak havoc.
Which
Uh,
is funny because 75% of this damn earth is water.
exactly, right? And most living creatures are made of a large portion of water as well.
Yeah.
So, um, but yeah, I would be a huge fan of this. This is something that I think would be really cool. I'd love to see how they pull it off. I could definitely see a couple of ways that they could pull it off, going into like a room with a lot of these little guys just wreaking havoc and throwing objects across the room and whatnot. Hopefully they don't hit you because then, or hopefully they do hit you and you can sue the park and make a lot of money. But
How are we gonna sue
uh,
HHN then? We can never have an HHN again.
no, I wouldn't sue them. I would settle outside of court for a pass for the rest of my life.
Lifetime
and
front of the line pass every night.
and a hotel paid for the rest of my life, and other accommodations like food and things like that. So every single year when I come, everything paid for. I get like the suite at the Hard Rock.
The only thing you got to pay for is your flight out there.
Yeah, funny enough, uh, bit of a tangent, completely side story, but I was getting in line one time for what's it called, Harry Potter, Escape from Gringotts,
Yeah.
and the attendant was blocking the entrance, and I was kind of trying to like sneak past her so I could get in line. She wasn't blocking it to not let people in. She was just kind of standing there talking to somebody. And as I went to sneak past the side of her, she turned around and elbowed me in the chest. And I was like, "Oh, lawsuit!" Playing around. And I was like, "I'm just kidding." And she was like, "Can I? I'm so sorry. Can I give you a speed pass for the rest of your day?" And I was like, "Hell yeah, got a
Hell
speed."
yeah.
And I was like, "But I'm here with my friend," and she gave us two.
Nice.
Yeah, so I should have
So it
got
all
her.
worked out. So yeah, Gremlins. I definitely got to check it out. It's definitely been on my watch list for a while, actually. And now that I have more time on my hands, I might actually start. I might check it out one of these nights. But yeah, um, as far as shows go for your event, we're looking at Academy of Villains, and there's a potential of bringing back the Lagoon Show because I guess it was such a big hit last year. It looked amazing from the footage I've seen, and that was just footage. I can only imagine what it's like in person. Um, but those are the two shows speculated to come back this year. Academy of Villains again is no no news to everybody. I mean, Academy of Villains is very popular in Orlando. Um, Better than the Jabberwockies, I can tell you that.
Anything's better than that. But
Anything's better than Jabberwockies.
Academy of Villains was cool. Maybe not something that I would frequent every single year,
Yeah,
because the Fear Factor live stage does get pretty hot.
yeah.
Um, Even though you get to like sit and relax, it gets pretty stuffy in there. So if it's Academy of Villains again, then I personally will probably avoid it. But the Lagoon show last year was amazing. Freaking amazing.
Yeah.
A spectacle that you must see if you go to Halloween Horror Nights. You have to make a time to watch it from beginning to end. Um, and if it does come back this year, which I don't see why not, it
Oh, it
seems
was so popular last year from crowds for when I've seen that surrounded that lagoon. I mean, I don't see why wouldn't they bring it back? I mean, if it's driving crowds in, you got yourself a hit right there.
yeah. And what better way to pay homage to the 30 years of Halloween Horror Nights than with a Lagoon show, kind of cataloging the years.
Yeah.
Um, I think that would be great. And if they really do want to bring Billie Eilish and they can't find a way to pull off her house, that's another perfect way to bring her in. I
Lagoon
think,
show.
although I give Billie Eilish a hard time because I really don't want her to be a house, I think her being the music behind the Fountain show or the Lagoon show is perfectly acceptable.
Definitely. And just if you guys want it, if they wanted to, like incorporate a lot of the properties that are at the event this year and just throw in her music. I'm pretty sure they can find a way to incorporate clips and shit,
Hmm.
from each property and put her music in. I mean, you just got to find the right person. And you got to literally sit down and listen to all her songs and then find what fits best in which areas. It's just that simple.
Yeah, and
Um,
from the Lagoon show aspect, if it ends up being a Lagoon show, kind of going over the history of Halloween Horror Nights,
mhm.
then the actual music itself, I don't think necessarily needs to be scary music. It could actually be more emotional music because most people are going to be having an emotional connection to the fact that it's been around for so long and look at all these things that have been done.
Definitely. No, yeah, I agree. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is your 2020 HHN leaked lineup or speculation lineup, however you want to look at it. Again, like Eddie said in the beginning of this video, this will probably be changing as more announcements get announced. That's usually how it works. Stuff doesn't always, fall into place at with Horror Nights. Stuff is constantly getting switched over due to rights and stuff. I'm already hearing right now that um,
Gremlins is
there's
pulled out.
Gremlins and there was another property that was out.
It may have been,
So I think it was Sabrina because that's a
yeah,
Warner
it may have been
Brothers.
Sabrina.
So
Uh,
there's already rumors and talks that those two are out, and the next two that are and potential for taking over. One is Invisible Man, and two, what was the other one we were talking about? There was another probably something Blumhouse related.
yeah. And the thing about it is, just because it changes doesn't mean that this currently isn't correct.
Yeah.
If there's anything that I know is that Halloween Horror Nights is playing with intellectual properties that they don't own, and sometimes people pull out. Warner Brothers is a big, uh, their pull-out game is on point.
Yeah, it really is. No, they do it, and I wouldn't be surprised if they did it this year, since there is talks of them bringing back Horror Made here this year. Being that they took a break off last year, there is talks about them bringing that event back this year. So I don't know what we can expect at that event if it does come back. So if we get any news on Horror Nights, if we get any news on Horror Made here, be sure to lock back to Nights of Horror and East versus West. Also, if there's any new Orlando news, be sure to lock back to Edutainment, because he'll be covering that within the next couple weeks if anything does come out. Be sure to tune in next week, because I was thinking of this the entire thing. What do you think about this? I think next week on East versus West, we should both sit down and have a maze building ideas kind of video, where me and you bounce each other off properties. We give our kind of synopsis of each maze, of things we would love to see to come to the event, and ultimately have a talk about it. What do you think about that?
I'm down. I'm locked in. You got me locked and loaded. When do you want to do it?
Locked in. You guys heard it here first. Tune in next week for a new episode of East versus West, where we sit down, talk about some dream mazes coming to the event, and we give our pitch to what we would put in these mazes to make them come true. That is going to do it this week for East versus West. Thanks for coming back, and thanks for waiting for so long. We're the type of channel that likes to just drop one out of nowhere. We like to have surprises every now and then.
Yeah, we can't let you guys get our rhythm,
I know. You think when you think you got us, you don't.
Exactly. This is like changing your route when you drive home so people don't follow you type of thing.
Because we just threw a curveball at you. We never done them back to back, week after week, East versus West, and we're gonna do it this week and next week. So boom, mic drop.
Or are we?
Oh, exactly. We might just save it. We might just save it for like another couple months.
But we should do it for sure.
Yeah, so tune in next week for that, and tune into both channels for new content. And yeah, that is gonna do it. I'm Anthony. That's my host Eddie. East versus West.
Deuces.
Your dose of both coasts.
Your dose of social distancing from both coasts.
Both coasts. Boom. I'll see you guys later.
Both coasts.